Hello, Read 585, and welcome to week 14. It's hard to believe we just have one more week of content after this, and that is it for this semester. This week we are talking about coaching conversations and the coaching lenses provided by the Aguilar text. So assignments for the week, you have two things to read. First is from Chapter 1 of Opening the Door to Coaching Conversations, a text you don't have, but I've provided in the week 14 block on titanium titled, What is a Coaching Conversation? It will introduce you to the 4 essential skills for coaching conversations, so read that first. And then second is Chapter 4 of The Art of Coaching, which is What Must a Coach Know? And that's going to tell you about the coaching lenses. I also provided 3 optional articles in the Week 14 readings folder just for you to have available to you. The first kind of goes over more of the basics of coaching conversations, so just how to be reflective. So that's a good article, but more at the basic level. This next one is differentiated coaching, so kind of a higher level of coaching. And then the last one is literacy learning through team coaching, so how to coach a team of teachers simultaneously and really invest them in their professional learning at the same time. So those are some additional resources there for you. Your participation activity is going to be to watch these 2 videos on YouTube of coaching conversations and to consider these 3 prompts. So I would recommend doing the reading first, then watching the videos. And as you do, think about an aha moment while watching these. And then think about all that we've been learning in regard to coaching philosophies from Jim Knight, Elena Aguilar. How does the coaching depicted in the video relate or not relate to the philosophies presented and learned about so far? And then select 2 of the hallmarks of high-quality coaching conversations that you read about in this week's readings and examine each coaching conversation in relation to those principles. So that is your assignment this week for the Week 14 discussion forum. And then if you would like to see the master, Elena Aguilar, in action, here are 2 videos of her coaching teachers, which are pretty impressive to watch. So those are available for you as well. So assignments due this week, your last participation activity, which is the coaching video analysis discussion forum. As a reminder, participation activities are not accepted late, so get it in on time. I will not be going back to check these as we are at the end of the semester. And then assignment number 3, which you hopefully made some progress on last week, is due December 12th. All right, so let's talk a little bit about coaching conversations. We have 2 purposes this week. First, to be able to explain those 4 essential skills for a coaching conversation and the 6 coaching lenses, so that you can integrate these ideas into your coaching conversation application piece of assignment 3. Part 2 is where you're actually going to, plan your coaching interaction with your teacher. So you should be incorporating many of the things from this week of instruction into that. So first assigned reading, what is a coaching conversation? It reminds us that a conversation implies that at least 2 people are talking with and listening to each other. So the conversation should not be dominated or driven by the coach. It is intentional and often includes pre-thought. And I know from experience that the better planned I am for a conversation, the more I've thought through and maybe even scripted exactly what I want to say. Obviously, you want to deliver it in an authentic manner, but the more planning I do beforehand, the better the conversation it goes. So you want to be really intentional about what you want to focus on, because it can be overwhelming for a teacher if you're coaching them and giving feedback on 100 different things. Really pick and choose and prioritize and deliver kind of focused feedback to them So they can be intentional with their follow-up and not feel, frazzled and fragmented trying to implement all these many different things. The conversation should really focus on the other person. This is about their professional learning and growth, not your personal agenda. The purpose is to stimulate thinking, growth, and change that leads to action. So ultimately, you want to see whatever you're discussing show up in their behavior as a result. And then it includes these 4 essential skills, which you'll read about: committed listening, paraphrasing, positive intent, and powerful questions. And then lastly, reflective feedback. And we'll talk more about reflective feedback in a second. But remember to read about these, really think about them as you watch the coaching videos and analyze whether or not the coach depicted does or doesn't employ these 4 essential skills. So the trouble with feedback is, sometimes coaches give direct negative, which means it's specific, but it's highlighting all of the things that the teacher did wrong. And that's not very motivating or encouraging to change or improve when someone is just telling you all of the things that you did wrong. So you don't want to give direct negative feedback. Versus positive ambiguous, you think that because it's positive, that this might be good feedback to give, but if it's ambiguous, it is very unclear as to the behavior that the teacher should emulate, duplicate, replicate. So if I said, yeah, great job with that. Well, great job with what? If I want to see them continue to do that, I need to be a little bit more specific. Great job providing 3 seconds of wait time before, calling on students for an answer. Or great job designating which person in the Think, Pair, Share should start the talking and then giving them a signal to switch partners. So be very specific with your affirmations or your positive feedback. And then with reflective feedback, which the article really highlights, you're clarifying the exact behavior that you observed that went well and kind of, their thought process behind it. You're commending or valuing that. And then you're helping them to suppose or imagine maybe what that might look like applied at an even higher level, or, maybe in another circumstance where you're not seeing them apply this. So maybe they do something really well during one part of their instructional day, but you want to see it carried over to another part, or they're only doing something some of the time or inconsistently, or maybe only with some of the students. So helping them to imagine what this could look like if they, really expanded upon it and implemented it to the umpteenth degree. All right, shifting over to coaching lenses. And actually, since the publication of The Art of Coaching, Elena Aguilar has added the lens of compassion. So you will not read about that in your text, but you read about that last week when you read her blog entry. So again, compassion assumes that there's no judgment of ourselves or others, appreciating that each of us makes choices based on the information and skills that we have at any good time. Compassion is really a feeling of empathy for another living being. So really thinking about what their day was like before they came to you, empathizing with them, which hopefully if you've been in the classroom, you kind of can do that and relate to them. Certain questions you can use to frame this lens. How is someone else experiencing this situation? What are things like from their perspective? That kind of thing. Next lens is the lens of inquiry, which encourages questions and valuing them as much as the answers that we find. So the purpose of this lens is really to ask those purposeful questions and investigate the situation to get more information. So, thinking about who's defining the problem, whose question is this, what data do we have on this problem? So really developing those good questions. The next lens is that of change management, and it pushes us to consider how change might be made and to think about the conditions that need to be present in order for change to happen. So change cannot be made unless many, if not most, of these elements are in place. So really exploring, what are the conditions needed for change? Next is systems thinking, and I think that systems thinking is really what drives transformational coaching. Thinking about, how all the different systems and ways that they're interwoven are affected by each other. And then it really believes the stance that everything is connected. And a lot of times it's hard for the teacher to see that, but you as an outside observer can see how, some of their actions are being driven by bigger factors and issues within the system of the school or the district. Okay, so good questions are thinking about, the broader systems that have been designed to produce or set up the results that you're seeing, thinking about, why did some of these behaviors happen, that kind of thing. Next is the lens of adult learning. And this really helps us understand who we're working with, what previous experiences, knowledge, competencies, beliefs, and interests they're bringing to the learning space. And so when we're aware of those things, then we can build from those or be mindful about attending to those. So really being mindful about, where is the teacher currently in their practice and where can we meet them? What is their zone of proximal development, so to speak, in their learning progression? Next is the lens of systemic or structural oppression. And, oppression resides in systems and structures like our education system and school structures, as well as within our individual consciousness. So thinking about social inequality and how, that is present and how in order to transform the system, we really need to think about how it's present in the system you're looking at. So here are different questions to prompt on that. Next, emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence really incorporates many skills. So first, self-awareness, second, self-management, third, social awareness, and fourth, relationship management. So in order to use the lens of emotional intelligence, you need to be in tune with an individual's ability or skill to identify, assess, and control the emotions of themselves, others, and of groups. All right, so those are the lenses. I wanted to kind of walk you through my process when I would debrief with a teacher. And I actually just use this process with all of my students in 581 because I've been observing them do intervention sessions with their students. So when I sit down to do a debrief, this is the structure I follow. Again, it's the Excel model, which I'm pretty sure I talked to you earlier in this semester about, but it starts with engage. So we start with good news. And celebrations always like to start our meeting off on a positive note. So they share good news, could be personal, could be professional. I share good news. Then X is explore. So here we want to leave time and space to investigate any needs that they might have before we get going. C is the communicate piece. So this is where I'm communicating my message as a coach as to kind of what I want to explore and focus the conversation about. So I might pre-plan my questions out here, script out my specific observation feedback so that it is positive and direct and it is reflective. And then as we wrap up the meeting, we talk about, what commitments are they making as a result of the conversation? How am I going to follow up with them? What support do they need from me? I usually ask them for feedback about how the meeting went. What can I do better as a coach? And then L, we leave with the launch. So, didn't explain, this is empower. So we engage, we explore, we communicate, we empower, and we launch. And that is the framework I follow. So just to look at my planning, which is a little bit sloppy, but I observed a teacher in the classroom who was teaching a read aloud. And, we had been working on different things to really integrate Common Core and just good practices and being rigorous and making sure the text is developmentally appropriate and things like that. So after observing the teacher, I pre-planned some questions, kind of starting with the inquiry lens. So, what was your goal for today's lesson? How does it connect to Common Core? Did the students meet it? How did you set that up with your modeling? So kind of, how did you gradually release them to be successful to this? What did you notice about student discourse? So the school and she personally, individually had a goal for discourse. What did you notice about student connections? So the lesson was on text to self connections, which actually isn't apparent in Common Core standards for this grade level. So these were the inquiry questions I was thinking about. In regard to change, what are the conditions for change? Do you have the skill and knowledge necessary to make the change? So kind of the purpose of the inquiry questions was to get her to see that this instruction actually wasn't rigorous enough for the expectations of Common Core. So in order to get her to change her practice, what do we need to do? Systems. So, why is it that you're teaching this lesson? And I know it's because this grade level is very committed and entrenched to these lessons and these structures that they've always done. But since, kind of the pedagogy is changing a little bit with Common Core and assessment expectations, we also should shift. And then I had a text we were looking at too to support adult learning, so could tie into that. So these were kind of the big areas of questions. And so actually, this is, I completed it with the teacher, but I had pre-planned, what was my emotional check-in going to be? What are you feeling? What are you proud of? What challenges or stresses are you facing? So wanted to start with that emotional check-in for the emotional intelligence lens. Then I did all of my inquiry questions. What went well? What was the goal for the students? That sort of thing. And then these were our next steps. So this is kind of my rough planning process, how that translates into focusing our conversation on just a few areas, and then how that led to our conversation. Here's another tool you might opt to use. This is from Elena Aguilar's website. This would look beautiful in part 2 of assignment 3, where you're scripting out your questions to the teacher and the thinking behind your questions and what lens that addresses. And, you should be aware of all the lenses, but you shouldn't be trying to incorporate all of the lenses into one conversation because that's really a lot to tackle. So you may pick and choose 2 or 3 of the lenses and then continue the conversation at your next meeting if you want to hit some others, but don't feel like you need to have a question for each lens for your conversation because that might not lead to a very focused conversation, but you should be mindful of all the different lenses and how they interact with each other. So again, I highly recommend using this as a planning tool and even putting this in part 2 of your assignment. Here's another coaching session planning tool that are a bunch of reflection prompts that you can use to prepare for a coaching conversation. So maybe you want to go through this process as you prepare for the coaching conversation with your fictitious client for that assignment. And then here are just some general coaching sentence stems that you may choose to integrate into your conversations. The more experience you get as a coach, the more well-versed you'll be with these and the more habit, it will be to integrate these. But it wouldn't be a terrible idea to have these, in front of you or on the back of your notebook or on your clipboard, just so you can see, to remind you to be actively listening, to give you some non-judgmental response starters, because we know Compassion, the lens of compassion suspends judgment. Here are some clarifying stems, which we know is an important, essential skill for coaching conversations, and some probing stems. So great resource tool to have at your fingertips to lead those conversations. All right, so those were the big things I wanted to highlight from the 2 required readings. This is just some information from the optional readings thought I would share in case you're not, doing those readings, or just to kind of preview what you can find in those. So the reading specialist as instructional coach, again, the focus is really on reflective coaching, and the 4 elements that lead to reflective coaching are first collecting data during observations, then reviewing the data as part of the coaching conversation. So your conversation should be based on some sort of data, whether it be observation data, student achievement data, student work samples, something. There should be data driving your conversation, so it isn't a judgmental conversation. Third is the importance of quality questioning that you're pre-planning in advance as a result of the data you've collected. And then fourth, you're connecting PD to current instruction. So, whatever is in the learning plan, similar to what you created for assignment 2, part 3, you should be connecting that to, what you're seeing, so that you're not always focusing on different things with them. And then another important point from this article is that reflecting as a coach and having your own support team is very important. You need training and development too. So in regard to systematic data collection, one thing you can use as data is observational data. So my preferred tool of choice is called selective scripting. So I write down, the time during the observation, and then, teacher words and actions, student words and actions. So this is written very objectively, exactly what I observe. So you don't use statements like students off task, but 2 students sharpening pencil, 3 students digging in desk. So what are the exact observable behaviors you're seeing? Because off task is a judgment. How do you know they're off task? What are the behaviors that you're seeing? So this is a great tool that I like to use because, I can reference, about 5 minutes into the observation, I observed this, why do you think that was that so many students were up out of their seats or whatnot? And it's very concrete, it's not judgmental, and it's just an observation. But at the same time, it's data we can talk about that, they can't argue with me because it's not a judgment I'm making. Then you want to review the data as part of your conversation, and you can do this many different ways. You can provide them with your observation notes ahead of time to review. You can give them some guiding questions to think about as they read through your notes, or you can just keep it general, like as you read through the observation notes, what was your reflection? You can provide the notes at the debrief and read through them together. You can highlight certain parts of the notes to specifically discuss. You could also video the lesson and have them reflect on that in advance. And that's what we did in 581. They were videoing part of a session with their student that was focused on their teacher practice school that we've been working on. And so then they submitted the video to myself. I selectively scripted it, scripting out the teacher and student actions for the video. I planned some questions, but typically I started with, what was your reflection of the video? And most of the time, their reflection was exactly what I had noticed and wanted to discuss. So that was a great way to initiate conversation with them. Or you don't have to use these notes at all. You can just script the questions. Third piece is the importance of planning those quality questions. So just the way we lesson plan to have, better implemented lessons, the more prepared you are for the conversation, the better it will go. Definitely script out your essential questions, but try to integrate them into the conversation naturally, and that comes with more practice and experience. Work backwards, so maybe think about, what is the end takeaway I want them to leave the conversation with, and what are some questions I can ask them to lead up to that? Questions I often rely on in coaching conversations. What was your goal for this lesson? What evidence do you have that students met it? Or what did you notice about, yada, yada, yada. Is there a way you could have done that differently? Here's a simple protocol to help guide the discussion. What were the children able to do in this reading lesson? What went well? This is great because it starts with a positive. What did you as the teacher do to help the student succeed? What else could you have done to make the lesson even stronger or to help students be even more successful in reading? So this kind of is similar to that process of, clarifying things that went well and then helping them to imagine an even greater potential of those things. And then lastly, having a meaningful close connected to PD. So have them make a commitment at the end of your conversation, something you can hold them accountable to. This could be in the statement of, I want to make a suggestion. I want you to try this for just 2 weeks. Are you willing to try that? Or, so what are you going to do differently or try out this week? I look forward to seeing that, whatever it is you discussed. What next steps did you come up with as a result of our conversation? If they can't think of anything, let me give you some suggestions. You could also send a follow-up email with next steps that you both agreed to, outlined in the email. All right, the next article was differentiated coaching. It talked about how learning happens within teachers and not to them. And as a result, we should be differentiating our coaching to provide multiple options for taking in information, making sense of ideas, sharing information learned. So, since all teachers have a different background and, adult learning lens really looks at that, a different place they're at with their learning, we should be meeting them at where they're at. So Tomlinson and McTeague suggest differentiating coaching through different approaches. So the content, the process, and the product, which are the ways you can differentiate for students in your classroom as well. So the approaches they suggested was using a daybook or quick writes to coach. So this is a space where teachers can plan, draft, think, reflect, notice, comment, draw, conduct action research, surveys. So using surveys to determine teachers' literacy learning strengths and needs. So this would be a great way to get some data on where the different teachers you're working with are in their professional learning so that you can meet them there. And then videotapes for professional evaluation. And they even gave a structured way to view those on page 506. And then lastly was an article on literacy learning through team coaching. And the whole idea was to get the team to really decide what they're going to learn about. So they identified some effective methods for teacher learning. It should be ongoing, uninterrupted, support for 9 weeks. It's job embedded on site with your own kids and team. It's collaborative. These are the things it's reflective, it's inquiry based. These are all of the things that we have found in our readings on professional learning that high quality, teacher learning should be. And so then they give you this 9-week structure of how to do a coaching cycle with a team of teachers with the goal of making them proficient in doing this independently so that they can do the next 9-week cycle without you as a coach. So I thought this was really helpful and helps, develop the PLC model as well as help the coach to be more efficient with their time if they can work with a team of teachers who are all struggling with something or working on something specific with their students. All right, so that was a little bit about those essential skills for a coaching conversation. Be sure to read about them in depth and look for them in the coaching videos, as well as evidence of the coaching lenses. Please be using the information from this lecture, as well as the readings, into your coaching conversation assignment. And lastly, I would like to leave you with this quote. There are leaders and those who lead. The difference is that those who lead inspire us. So as a coach, you should be a leader. You should be inspiring people to change their behavior and actions. You shouldn't just be telling them what to do. Dictator, be a leader instead. So with that, I hope you have a great week. I will see you next week for our last week of content, wrapping up talking about goal-directed coaching for our last week of the coaching unit. Have a great week, everyone.